Hi, I'm Ted Pattison. Welcome to the Office Developer Screencast Virtual Tour. In this video tutorial, we're going to walk through the process of creating and testing features with Windows SharePoint Services 3.0. Features are a new innovation added for developers to this new version of SharePoint. They allow you to define at the lowest possible level the definitions for things like page templates, lists, content types, event handlers, and workflows, and then to be able to roll them out into a farm so that they can be activated within the context of existing sites or added as ingredients into new sites. So when it's time to create our first feature, we have to pick a development tool. In many developer circles, it's known that real men and real women use Visual Studio for any development task. So let's go ahead and start up Visual Studio 2005. And when you create a very simple feature, all you really need to do is create an XML file. I'm going to get a little bit more involved, and I'm going to create a project for this new particular feature that has a class library DLL associated with it. So I'm going to go ahead and call this project Litware Feature 1. And when I go ahead and create the project, it creates a class library DLL for me. I don't really care about using that at first, so I'm going to go ahead and close that down. And let's go ahead and start by creating the XML file. But what I want to start by doing is creating a directory structure. When it's time for us to deploy this particular feature, we're going to have to create a directory with the name of our particular feature and put it in a system SharePoint directory called Features. So I'm just mimicking or shadowing the file structure that we're going to have to copy our feature files into. And then to get up and going, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's add a new item. And we'll create a XML file, and I'm going to use the standard name for this first file, which is feature.xml. And now that I have this feature XML file, I can go ahead and put the XML inside here that will define the high-level attributes of this feature. Now, I don't want to write in the XML by hand, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to include a schema so that I can have IntelliSense driving my adding things inside there. So the first thing I have to know is I have to know where to go. If I go to the C drive, into Program Files, into Common Files, into Microsoft Shared, into, at the very end here, Web Server Extensions, and then into 12, and then into Template, and then XML. Once again, that convoluted path is Program Files, Common Files, Microsoft Shared, Web Server Extensions, 12. So that's where SharePoint v3 puts all its system files. And then in the template directory, there's a directory called XML. And inside there is a bunch of schemas, and the one that we care about here is the top level, WSS12.xsd. So I'm going to go ahead and choose OK to add the schema inside. And now, as I start adding in my XML, you can see that it is driven through IntelliSense. And now let's go ahead and add some things to this particular feature. For instance, I'm going to have to add an ID to the feature. So I'm going to go drop down the Tools menu and bring up our long-lost friend from COM, GUIDGen. And I'm going to make sure I'm in registry format, and I choose New GUID. And if you don't like the GUID you get at first, just keep trying, and finally we get a very beautiful GUID. Oh, I like this one the best. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that GUID, and we're going to paste it inside here. Once we've gotten the GUID and pasted it inside, we can go ahead and trim off those curly braces. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a title. So we'll say Litware Feature 1 is going to be the title that we show to users. Also, what gets to be a good idea is to add a description inside of our demo. I won't take too much time to create this description. The next thing we're going to add in is going to be the scope. So we have to decide in what scope we want this feature to be activated in. And the lowest scope is at the level of the site. Now realize there's a backward naming convention. When you say scope equals web, you're talking about features that activate inside the context of sites. When you say scope equals site, it's really scope to the site collection. So you'd create a feature that just would activate once inside a site collection, not on the individual sites. So for our demo, we want to activate inside of a site, so we say scope equals web. Then the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mark the hidden attribute as false. When you have a feature and your feature becomes installed in the system, there's a page that users could go and find that your feature's there, and they can go ahead and proactively activate it inside the site. So if you want that to happen, you say hidden equals false. If you want a feature that users can't see, and therefore activation requires activating it from the command line or from custom code, you can say hidden equals false. Okay, so there's the basic starting point for a feature. I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And now that I save the file, the next thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and copy it up to the file system. The next thing I want to do is I want to go to the place in the file system of the front-end web server where WSS keeps all the feature files. So if I go down under C Program Files, Common Files, Microsoft Shared, Web Server Extensions, 12 Template, there's a directory called Features. And if I open up the Features directory, I see there are many directories, one for every feature that's been installed on this box. So one thing I'm going to need to do is to take my feature files, in this case there's only one, but copy it to the right place. So let's go ahead and grab my particular project, which is Litware Features. Let's go into that directory Features, and there's the one file that contains the other files from my particular feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Control key so I can drag and drop to copy instead of moving. So I've got the feature directory copied into the right place. Let me go ahead and choose refresh. You can see that Litware Feature 1, it's the name of the directory and also the name of the feature. And inside there's our XML file that defines our feature so far. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and open up a regular team site. So this is just a blank site that's been provisioned at the root of the default website, just like any other site in the farm. And I'm going to go to Site Settings. And under Site Settings, there's a link to Manage Site Features. So remember, this is managing site scope features. This is managing site collection scope features. Because our feature is scope equals web, we go ahead and click on that, and we look down here and we find that we don't see our feature. It can't be activated. So we see that installing a feature is more than just copying the files. Copying the files into the features directory is step one. But your second step is you have to proactively tell SharePoint that your feature has been added and it can be activated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the command line. Now you can either use the STS administration tool, STS admin, or you can write custom code. Now also note that this demo, I can use STS admin directly from the command line because I've configured a system path to point to the bin directory where the SharePoint team put the stsadmin.exe utility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by saying, give me help on the operation, which is install feature. And it goes ahead and runs and tells me that I call install feature like any other operation by -o, and then install feature, and then I pass the name parameters. And so in this case, there's one name parameter that I care about, which is the name parameter. And so what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to add in the name of that directory, Litware Feature 1, and what Windows SharePoint Services does is it looks inside the features directory, finds a directory called Litware Feature 1, and then looks inside there for a file called feature.xml. Now that we've done that, let's go back to our site, and I'm going to take the exact same page and refresh it. And now look what shows up, Litware Feature 1. And it's not in an active state, but the user can go ahead and activate that. So if the user activates this particular feature, you can see it moves down in the list, so all the active ones that can be deactivated are shown below. All the ones that are inactive that can be activated are shown up above. But now I can activate the feature. I can also deactivate the feature. Notice that when you deactivate the feature, there's a buyer beware warning that says, do you really want to do this? I say yes. And so I've just gone through and activated and deactivated the feature. Now, it really doesn't do very much yet because I haven't added any elements or any event handling to my particular feature. But now we've gone through the basics of how to install the feature and activate it and deactivate it from the context of a site. So now we're going to return to Visual Studio and actually do something useful within this feature. I'll start by going to the feature file. And inside the feature file, I'm going to decide to add something which is called a element manifest. So I go ahead and I add an element manifests element, and inside there I'm going to add a single element manifest element, and I'm going to point to a generic file name called elements.xml. And now that I've done that, we'll come over here and we'll choose add, and we'll add a new file, a new XML file of that name, elements.xml. And now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and point to the same schema that we did before. So when I come back up here, notice that I should be able to step back, and once I've added the schema the first time, it should remember that schema and let me add it in again. Now that I've done that, let me go ahead and step back out, and this time you can see that I'm adding in a top level element called elements, and then inside there I'm going to start adding in different elements. And just to show you two possible element types, why don't we start with a module. A module is what allows you to copy files. In this case, I'm going to take page templates or a single page template and copy it up into the site. So let's say that I'm going to create a new page template which is called sports.aspx. So I'll just call this sports, the module name. Secondly, I have to put the path and the URL where this is going to be. And in this case right here, I'm going to put both of those to blank because I want the files to be copied right up into the root of the site. But you could put in some type of offset path there if you wanted to. Okay, now that we've gotten that, inside the module element is where I add one or more file elements. So I'm going to add in a file element, and I'm going to say URL, and I'm going to say sports.aspx because I want to create a page that's going to allow my particular users go off and see some type of information about sports I've put together. Now this is going to be a page template. So another thing that I can say is, what type is this going to be? Do I want it to use the ghosting facilities that's built into SharePoint? So if I say ghostable, it's going to automatically provision the page but use the template that lives on the front end web server. And then when people use a tool like SharePoint to customize this particular page, we'll unghost it and put a customized version of it inside the database. Okay, and then if I want to, I can also say ignore if already exists equals false. So just overwrite the file if it's already there when this particular feature gets activated. Okay, so now that I have the file inside there, let me just neaten it up a little bit. I have to have a file. So I'm going to go back to my features directory, and inside my features directory, let's go ahead and add a new item. In this case right here, why don't we go ahead and add a simple page. So I'll just make it based on a text file, but I'll call it sports.aspx. And now that I've created that particular page, I created it as a text file so I could start from scratch. And when I go ahead and put something inside here, we'll say language equals C#, and we'll say master page file, and this is going to equal something that ASP doesn't really know about. It just exists inside of SharePoint. But we'll go ahead and we'll say master URL, and then we'll point to the default.master. So I want my page template just to use the one that's built in. Now the other important thing as you're creating these page templates, it should fit inside the master page, content page architecture that's built into SharePoint. So since I've linked to master default.master, the other thing that I need to do is to make sure I only use ASP content controls inside here. And also I need to know enough about default.master to know what the placeholders are. So I'm going to overwrite a placeholder named, not name, but placeholder main. And then I'm going to add a run at server tag. And at this point, what I have is my ASP placeholder, and I won't do very much here. We'll just say something like sports page, and here are the sports pictures that we want inside of our site. And we'll go ahead and save this particular page. Okay, so the first thing I've added to my feature is a page template that gets provisioned into a page instance at runtime. And you can see that I've created a very simple page right here, and I've also gone up into elements and created the module to add that inside there. Now the other thing I might want to do is I might want to go ahead and add in a menu command. The menu command that I'm going to add in is going to allow the user to go to the Site Actions menu and to locate that particular page. So the first thing that I'm going to do as I create this is I'm going to say the ID equals, and since I'm writing this into the Site Actions menu, I'm just going to say Site Actions toolbar. That is going to be the particular name that I'm using. The next thing that I care about is the group ID that the site action is going to be in. And so I need to write in Site Actions, since I want to write that into the Site Actions menu. Now the next thing that I have to do is I have to specify the location, which once again has to be spelled out according to the name of the target menu. So SharePoint dot standard menu is what I want to write into. Let me go ahead and correct that right there. Now that I've got the location, there's also this notion of sequence. And I'm going to pick a middle of the road sequence number, but this gives you the ability to move your custom action command up or down in one of the built-in menus. Now the next thing I need to add in is the title. And so we'll say read about sports. And then finally, the last thing that I'm going to put inside there is not actually an attribute of custom action, but inside there we're going to have a URL action. And the URL action has an attribute called URL. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a site relative path. So I'll say site, and then we'll say sports.aspx. And now that we've gotten that all set up, we should be able to close off this tab, and let's go ahead and save all our work. Okay, now that we have saved our work, since we've done a lot of changes to the feature, some of the things that we're going to have to do is go back and take our feature, since we've saved the files, and copy the new files inside. So now you can see that your elements are inside there. Secondly, as you're building features, realize that all these files are being cached. So I'm going to go back to IIS and do an IIS reset as well. And I have to spell IIS reset correctly. So I go ahead and run an IIS reset. And now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to reinstall the feature. Now I could uninstall the feature and then install it a second time. But I can also go back to, say, install feature, and then I can use the force element right there. So I go ahead and say install feature, force that feature to be installed. And now that we've done that, let's go ahead and refresh what we have inside the browser right here. It's going to take just a second to start up because we did an IIS reset. But the idea is now that we have a feature, let's just go back to the home page of the site and see the user's experience. Here's the user. User drops down the Site Actions menu. Notice that Site Settings is the bottom selection. Now the user comes through there, chooses Site Settings, goes to Site Features. Now the user is going to activate Site Features. Now that Site Features, Litware Feature 1 has been activated, let's go back here. Let's go back, and all of a sudden notice that we've added a new menu command into the Site Actions menu, and when someone clicks on this link right here, lo and behold, it takes us to our new page. So we've just been through the process of adding two elements into our feature. One was a page template that gets provisioned into a page instance. Notice that it's being ghosted right now, but just like other pages in SharePoint, if we used the SharePoint Designer, we could customize that page and save an unghosted version to the database. And you also saw me use the custom actions to go ahead and add a command into the Site Actions menu. Okay, so now we're in the home stretch. The final thing we want to do is add some code into a DLL that gets fired automatically. Our feature gets activated. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a feature receiver class. I have to inherit from a specific class created by the SharePoint team. So I'm going to start by adding a reference. And as of Beta 2, you go to the very bottom and you pick Windows SharePoint Services. Notice that there's a couple different ones. But if I go over here to the right, I notice that there's only one, that is Microsoft.SharePoint.dll. So that's the DLL I want to add a reference to. Now, inside of our class, let's go ahead and name that feature or Litware feature receiver. And let's go ahead and open that particular source file. And I'm going to start by adding in a using statement, Microsoft.SharePoint. That's the namespace I care about. And inside there is a special base class called SP Feature Receiver. And that's what I want to implement. Now let me go into full screen mode for a second. And if I choose override, there are 4 methods in this class that we should go ahead and override. The first one is installed. The second one, the one that we care about in this particular demo, is feature activated. Notice that if I keep going down, the third one is going to be deactivating, and the fourth one is going to be feature uninstalling. So when you create a feature and you decide to create a feature receiver, you should provide implementation for all 4 of these. In our case right here, since this is just a Hello World demo, I'm going to go ahead and provide only code inside the one method feature activated. And the idea of the first two, feature installed and feature activated, is that they happen right at the end of the installation or activation provisioning process. So that if inside of your feature you have elements to define list definitions and list types, they've already been provisioned, and the code that you write inside here can access those. Now, the one piece of code that I'm going to write inside here is we want to get a hold of the current site, which is an SP web object. So the site in which the context of the feature is being activated. And so I'm going to say equals, and notice that they provide a single parameter inside this called properties. And if I say properties.feature.parent, I get back the parent object, whatever the scope of activation is. So in our case, it's going to be an SP web object. So once we've got the SP web object, I'm going to say site.title, and let's just do something really obvious. We'll say it worked. And we'll finish up by saying site.update so that we can actually write our changes back. Now that we've written the code inside this feature receiver, we have to install it in the global assembly cache. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the project for the class library DLL and say sign the assembly, and I'm going to use the convenience of Visual Studio to automatically create a Litware key for me. And I'm not going to use password protection. I'll just go ahead and create that key file right here. So what then I should be able to do is to go ahead and build. And so now I've built one of these, and it should have a strong name. So if I go down here and take a look at this particular DLL, I can see it's inside there. Also, if I decide that I want to put it in the global assembly cache so I can test it, I'm going to bring up C Windows Assembly. and I'm just going to take my DLL and just use the convenience of dragging and dropping inside here. So now I've taken the DLL and installed it in the global assembly cache. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the feature.xml file. And inside feature.xml there are two different attributes that I've passed up before. One is receiver class and the other is receiver assembly. Now I could type these in, but what I find is that I use an old friend. I use an old friend called Reflector. Reflector is a piece of shareware that you can find on the internet, very easy to download, very popular among .NET developers. And if I say open, and I go down there and I look down under projects, litware, feature, bin, debug, there's the DLL. What I can do is I can find that particular DLL, and now I can simply copy and paste this information from Reflector into my XML file. So there is the name of the assembly, which is hosting the code. And I can also go back in here and look under this namespace and find this class, and then I can just, to be safe, copy and paste the class name of this as well. So once I get that information inside here, we'll go ahead and save. And now the DLL's been recompiled, it's been put in the global assembly cache, and we've updated feature.xml. So in order to test this, we're going to have to do a couple things. First of all, let's go back to our particular site, and I'm going to go ahead and deactivate this feature just so I can go ahead and activate it once more when we're done with our testing. Secondly, we have to worry about taking our new files. So if we go into litware feature 1, where the system files are, because I've updated feature.xml, I'm going to have to come back here and recopy this new file here. So once I take the new file, copy that information. Remember, once again, with IIS, we're going to have to go back and do an IIS reset. And then because I've changed the feature.xml file, the other thing that I'm going to be forced to do is to reinstall the feature with that forced parameter. And then finally, let me go ahead and install the feature one more time. And now that we've installed the feature, the final part of the demonstration should be we'll go back to our particular site. Once we go back to our particular site, now the user comes through and it's loading down the menu right here. And we're going to go ahead and pick site settings. We're going to go ahead and pick site features. There's our feature right here. We'll go ahead and choose activate. And once we choose activate, we see that up top here that the site title was updated when the feature was activated. So just going back here to start giving you ideas, what would you like to do when your feature gets activated? All I did was I took the title and changed it. But since now you're into the object model, if you want to create document libraries, if you want to add navigation links to your particular pages to point to pages that you've provisioned in, anything is possible. You can do anything with respect to security. So that takes us to the end of our demo, getting up and going with features.